Good morning, gardeners. Morning for me. It's late for many of you. I saw some people checking in from Indonesia at 11 p.m. I'm glad you've been able to find us here in the States. We've changed our daylight savings time. So it's an hour earlier for me. It may be an hour earlier for you, but I'm glad to see you here to join the community. This is the spot to get your gardening questions answered, to learn a little bit of what you need to continue on your gardening journey, and above all, just to be part of this wonderful gardening community that we have from all around the world. Lars was checking in from Norway already. We've had people all over the States, a lot of people from Oregon checking in. And I saw Adam Burley from Central Point, Oregon. I actually have some family in that area. I hope you survived the fires pretty well. My family didn't. They lost all the houses involved. But I hope all the rest of you, all the way up to Salem, are doing well in Oregon today, as are all the people from around the world. Lots of good information ahead. I'll be answering all of your questions. I'm planning on throwing out some good information on fall gardening and winter gardening, and there's so much more to come. So keep your questions coming. Hello, everybody. Yadira from Houston, Texas, Vanessa in Tennessee, Greg from Omaha, and Nui99 from Brighton in the UK. That's great. Fabiola from Chile, Shirley's from Georgia. It's so great to see everybody here. We even have a lot of the regulars from Colorado checking in, and this is a great week for us in Colorado. In my Zone 5B garden, we're probably going to set another record high temperature today, probably tomorrow too. So last week we got slammed by cold weather. Today it's warm again. And for those of you that have noticed, I'm back in the lights. I had a huge amount of healing on my skin, on the face this week. And so I feel comfortable getting back under the lights, away from the shadows like I have been in the last couple live streams. So it's good to see you here, and let's go ahead and move forward with some of the questions that have already been popping up. A lot of discussion already this morning, and thanks for the words popping back and forth from Lena and Jay and the others. But Tanya was asking how to prevent E. coli contamination in your garden, which is a fantastic question. And Trudy's Fun, thank you for that. I appreciate the super chat to start today. That's wonderful. So Patrick is also checking in from beautiful Trinidad. You guys got slammed with some snow last week, so hopefully you've been shoveled out and enjoying the warmer weather. But let's get to the E. coli question, because it's a great question. A couple things to do. Some of the information that's already been passed back and forth has been talking about manures and any type of animal products that you would be using in your garden. So you may have noticed, if you've watched my videos and previous live streams, when I talk about using manure in the garden, I try to always talk about using aged manure. And that's a critical component. There are some clean manures. You can use rabbit manure and alpaca manures and a few others right away. But even in those cases, I try to let them age a little bit, because fresh animal manures generally do have the potential to carry E. coli. And so if you put a fresh manure in your garden soil or as a mulch around your plants, you could possibly be introducing E. coli to your garden. If you age it, 6 months is usually all it takes. The more the better. But that's enough to kill the pathogens that might be in that manure. So if you're using horse manure, steer manure, set it off in a pile, let it age. I'll then add the aged manure generally to my compost pile. Now, if my compost pile is getting really dry and brown and I need to add some greens, I'll put some fresh manure into the compost pile as a nitrogen source to get it amped up and cooking. But even then, I'll wait to use that compost just to try to lessen any risk of E. coli. And when I use manures, generally I'm using the manures around my fruit trees and around perennial bushes. I don't like to use manures around the vegetable crops. again, as a way to lessen the risk of E. coli contamination. So there's one way to approach it. It's to recognize where the source of the E. coli could be coming from, and then try to reduce the threat as much as possible. At the Galileo garden, at the school garden, we would take it even a step further. We wouldn't use manures in our food crops, but when it came time to harvest, and the school kids were the ones doing a lot of the harvesting, we made sure everybody washed their hands. And particularly in an environment like a school, and this is pre-2020, we would have disposable gloves that we would give the kids if there was any concern that the kids could be bringing in any type of contamination. And if any of those students had been sick and missed school, they weren't allowed into the garden to harvest for at least a week. So essentially, we were quarantining our students at harvest time because we didn't know what potential problems they might bring to the garden. So you can think about it from a manure perspective and an amendment perspective, but also think about it from a harvesting perspective. And anytime you're going to harvest your crops, and I know most of us don't do this, but you really should wash your hands well if you've been sick or someone in your family has been sick, just to avoid the possibility of contamination. So thanks for all of you that were talking back and forth for that little bit of a string, because that can be an important aspect of gardening. You don't want to make yourself sick. And it holds true for new gardeners and experienced gardeners. We should all have nice, good, clean gardens, as clean as possible. So let's see what else we have popping up. Mike is saying, I planted tomatoes from seed and they have popped up nicely. How long should I wait to start preventive bug spraying? Bugs are bad here in Florida. Thanks for your help. So if you've seen my streams in the past, my videos, I'm not a big fan of spraying just to spray. And so first off, I would say identify the pest. So when you see a pest start to attack, identify it before you begin spraying, because you might be spraying some of the beneficial insects that would eat and deal with the bad insects. So that's the first thing. Wait until you see insects appear before you spray. And then when you identify what the pest is, that will help determine the proper corrective action. And I get it. There are many areas of the world. The southern states of the United States are a great example where sprays may often be necessary to save your crops. I get it. But you need to understand what the pest is, what the insect is, and then choose the spray accordingly. So that will affect your timing. If you just spray before the pests show up, there's a real good chance that you're damaging your environment and some of those beneficial insects might be killed in the process. So that's how I approach it, is when I do apply something like neem oil, diatomaceous earth, whatever the correction actions I'm using, I wait until the pest appears and then I deal with it. We had another question from Bettina early on asking about ripening green tomatoes and whether it was a good idea to bring them inside and put them under grow lights. You don't need lights at all if you've got green tomatoes and you want them to ripen. Some of the answers popping back and forth were spot on. If you wrap them in newspaper, that tends to hasten the ripening indoors, because what's happening, it's not light that causes the green tomatoes to ripen, it's ethylene gas that the tomatoes are producing themselves, and that's what causes the tomato to ripen. There's a lot of other fruit that also emits ethylene gas, bananas being a prime example. So if you want the tomatoes to ripen even faster, put them near bananas and they'll turn color as soon as they're ready to turn color. Wrapping them in newspaper, just setting them out on a windowsill is often enough, but it's not the light, it's the gas that causes them to ripen. And then Stephen Luna was asking about cover crops, saying that he'd planted late and now the frost is coming, and is it too late? Will they even sprout and grow? It depends on the plant. I did some winter rye cover crops this year, and I planted them on time, but then we had a really early freeze. Last week, the temperature got well below freezing. It actually got down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit here, which is extremely cold. My winter ryegrass made it through just fine. And so now it's growing in this record heat that we've got. So a lot of it depends on the plant. Don't be too concerned about it. Just have some patience. You're going to have to wait to see what your weather gives you. And if you see a frost coming, then yes, you can definitely cover your cover crops when a frost threatens so that they'll continue to sprout and grow with the remaining warm days that we have. And I'll be talking about this through the course of the live stream today because I want to throw out a lot of stuff about preparation for winter, fall gardening, and a lot of other things like that. So great to see people checking in. Rose is checking in from Arizona. That's wonderful. Let's see what we have. There's a total of 162 people already. Isn't that fantastic? And we just got the morning off to a start. So I think that's fantastic. Great to see everybody checking in. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the information about the fall gardening. And so, and a lot of this holds true for spring gardening as well. So those of you in Australia and South Africa and Indonesia and other parts of the country where it might not get as cold, you can still use some of these ideas even as you're preparing your spring garden. And one is get all your organic material together. Now, I've done a few videos recently where I've been amending the soil. The video that came out yesterday was showing a really easy method to get the soil improved in your garden by adding organic matter. And that's a great thing to do any time of year. But there are some seasons where you'll have more organic material. So in fall, for instance, as the leaves are beginning to fall from the trees, rake up all your leaves and get your neighbor's leaves and get any other set of leaves that you can find. If that means driving up and down your neighborhood and asking your neighbor if you can have their leaves, or maybe that last cutting of grass as people are putting their lawns to bed for the winter, go ahead and collect all that. And the reason I say ask your neighbor, because I think it's a good idea rather than just steal bags off the curb that are going to be picked up by the trash man. Ask your neighbor if the grass or if the leaves have been treated with any pesticides or any herbicides. And if it's clean material, then take it back to your garden and use it. And you can use it as a soil amendment, you can use it as a mulch, but definitely get in there and start using some of that material that is all around us. And in the spring, it's the same idea. You have a lot of plants that are just starting to pop up. People might be cleaning their gardens and pruning the trees. All of that organic matter can be used in your garden. So take advantage of this changing of the seasons to really get a head start and get some of that material that's going to improve your garden. So Amy's saying, my neighbor says the cottonwood trees have too much tannins to use its leaves. Is that true? Not if they're dried. So there's a lot of fresh leaves, or I should say many fresh leaves do have tannins, or they do have juglone. They do have materials that as a green material could harm the soil or could harm soil organisms or could affect the growth of plants. But once the leaves have dried, any of those negative effects have been greatly dissipated. So oak leaves in particular, no problem whatsoever when they're dried. Black walnut is one of those trees a lot of people have concerns about. And yes, they can be a concern if the leaves are fresh. But once even the walnut leaves have dried, you can use them as a mulch easily on your soil with very few concerns. Greg is saying, when overwintering peppers inside, should I remove any blooms? My peperoncini is coming back to life, sending out flowers inside. It depends. Now, to overwinter the peppers, basically just keeping them alive until you can put them out in the spring, yes, I would suggest clipping off any of the flowers that develop, because as the fruit develops, it's typically going to be a different environment than outside. You've probably got less light. The temperature is going to be less than the peppers are used to growing in. And so the plant is going to be a little bit stressed by comparison to how it's growing in the summer. And so if you have fruit growing on a stressed plant, it's going to stress the plant even more. So by plucking off those flowers and keeping fruit from developing, there will be less stress on your plant, and it'll probably overwinter and be much stronger in the process. Unless you've got a light setup and a heater setup and want to grow the fruit, that's different. But to just be overwintering in typical conditions, I'd say pluck off the flowers. Jean-Pierre Postman is saying, I asked my neighbors for eggshells and mullet in powder to amend calcium and magnesium in the ground. Is that a good idea? There are mixed results to that. A lot of the research I've seen with eggshells say they really don't break down very quickly in the soil. They can add calcium and magnesium over time, but it usually takes an acidic soil, some type of acidic compound, to really assist in those eggshells breaking down into a form that plants can use. So like in my area where we have a lot of alkaline soil, you can put eggshells, even ground eggshells, into the soil, and it will take a long time for them to break down and be usable by the plants. But if you've got acidic soil, then yes, it can be done, and the eggshells can add some nutrients to the soil. Either way, it does take a long time for eggshells to break down. Big B, the fluffy redneck. Good to see you today. Asking, I have a lemon tree that sprouted from seed last year. My question is, how would I best take care of it for to survive in North Carolina weather for the next decade and beyond? So I can't give you a specific question because I'm not that familiar with North Carolina weather. I would suggest you try to find others in your area that might be growing citrus. But generally speaking, it's big weather changes that affect citrus the most, and especially like lemon trees. So if you see a dramatic change in the weather coming, you might want to consider having a system in place where you can quickly cover the tree. And I'm assuming you'll keep a lemon tree relatively small, so it should be relatively easy to cover. But if you can help protect the wind from, or help protect the tree from very strong winds and dramatic changes in the weather, that's one of the best things you can do when you're growing citrus, even in an area like North Carolina, and you will be exposed to some winter conditions. So that's one of the ways to really try to get the plants growing. Once they get established, they'll do better, but particularly in the beginning years, try to protect the plants, the trees, as much as possible. But do try to check with others in your area who are doing it successfully, because they've probably got some tricks to share that can help you out. Stephen Luna is saying, will composting the powdered shells help? I do put my eggshells, ground eggshells, in my compost, understanding that they may never break down. But yes, first, some of that activity in the compost pile might help them break down. And then once they go into the soil, they might break down further. Don't look at eggshells as a magic fix to the garden. There's a lot of videos, a lot of people out there saying, plant eggshells, they're going to save your tomatoes. It really doesn't work that way. They just take so long for them to break down. But composting first can be a great idea. Linda Hardwick saying, in our area, hemlock bark is often used as a decorative mulch. I have a pile over a year old and used it as a mulch in the garden. Hope it does well. Absolutely. And so hemlock is another good example. When it's fresh, it could potentially pose problems, not just to the plants, but to you as well. It's like the manure. If you have any concern about using barks or wood-based products or even leaves in your garden, age them. Put them in a pile off to the side, and as they're exposed to weather and as they're exposed to time, a lot of those harmful elements like the tannins and the juglone will also dissipate. So I have no problem using any of those materials through the compost or through aging. It all tends to work pretty well. Dwayne is saying, is there any proper material that is not glass for making a small greenhouse? What can be used attached to the wood beams? Oh yeah, there's lots of materials that you can use. The greenhouse I had at the school and the greenhouse I'm planning to build, I'll be using polycarbonate panels, basically extremely durable plastic material, polycarbonate. And it's so strong, basically you just build the frame and you screw right through the polycarbonate into your wood frame that holds them in place. And then you put a tape or some material over the seams just to keep the weather out. But very durable. Polycarbonate is so strong you can take a baseball bat and swing at it all day long. Take rocks, throw rocks at it. It won't break the material. Much safer than glass and very easy to use. You can cut it. You can screw through it to attach it. That's how I'll be building my greenhouse when I get to that point in my garden build out. Think about using a polycarbonate. Okay. Lots of good information going back and forth. Let's see what else we have. Let's see, we can go ahead and cancel out on James Robert. I like Illuminati, but not for this channel. So we're going to go ahead and hide James Robert if it hadn't already been done before. So yeah, give a good thumbs up to Jay and Heidi. As always, Jay and Heidi are active in the live stream today and answering questions, and that's a wonderful thing. So let me go ahead and show you this. It's about the time that we have to talk about our background. And so just want to see, this is a picture that Jay sent me from her garden with a cat come Halloween time in the garden. Who knows what kind of damage that cat might be adding to the landscape, but wanted to show you that. She shared that picture with me, and so I thought it would be fun to share with you. And this background that I'm using actually comes from Celeste Kavulak. And for those of you that don't know, weeks ago I put out the call, and I'll do it again right now. If you've got a picture of your garden that you would like me to show as my backdrop during these live streams, send me that photo, a brief story about it, permission to use it, to gardenerscott@gardenerscott.com, and I'll probably add you to the queue and you'll have the opportunity. But this one today comes from Celeste, and this is a garden that's been 3 years in the making. I think Celeste has another great gardening story. She's had surgery done first on her left hand, and so for much of the time she's been gardening one-handed with her good hand, her right hand, but still at it, still active, still doing all those activities. And now she's actually going to have surgery done on the right hand, and we'll get back to being a left-handed gardener. So it just goes to show you, this is such a wonderful activity. It's so healthy on so many levels, but I'm just so impressed by gardeners who do this with some type of adversity. If you're a one-handed gardener, you can still garden. You can still enjoy it. You can still do great. And she shared with me that the garden is really a nice place to sit and dance and write and meditate and think, and above all, and just enjoy nature. So I hope you enjoy the picture behind me today, Celeste's garden, a spot that she's done over a period of years, one-handed, but can still get out there and just enjoy the space, enjoy all that there is about gardening, and enjoy nature. So thank you for sharing the picture today, Celeste. I'm not sure if you're on the live stream, but I hope you're either here or you see it in replay, because this is a beautiful space, and I'm so glad that you were able to share it. So let's see. Jake Dixon says, garden photo, I live in a forest region, was building new garden beds in several plots. My trike says, give me something good to eat. I think that's wonderful. I have no doubt, Jay, that you've got a lot of good things to eat coming out of your garden. So that was fun sharing that picture. And Denise is saying a beautiful space. Yeah. A garden space is a beautiful space. For me, even in the middle of winter, even when everything is brown from dying in the winds and the cold and the snow, a garden is still a beautiful space. You don't have to be surrounded by green, lush plants to enjoy a garden. It is just a space to enjoy, and especially when you build it. I find building the garden to be one of the best aspects. Sure, I like harvesting, I like learning, I like sharing, but I really enjoy the building of the garden, because then when I take that time to sit in the garden and to spend the time meditating and thinking and reading and observing and enjoying nature, I'm doing it in a space that I built. It's my space. And sure, others may have had a role to play, which is like why I like to share the activity. So when they come to the garden, they can share in the enjoyment of the building as well. So I just think it's so wonderful, and so glad to see all of you that are here that are also moving forward, building your gardens, building your spaces, especially a lot of the new gardeners. So PD is saying, when you think about all the benefits of gardening, it is incredible. Absolutely. And Yannette Dixon says very peaceful. So just keep enjoying that space. So let's jump back into the theme for the week as to fall gardening and preparing our space, because there's a lot about the garden, and depends on where you live. You may not have been exposed to some of those cold conditions yet, like Stephen. The frost date is still to come, so you still have plants growing. Well, one of the things to consider, if you haven't already recognized it, is moving into the fall, a lot of our normal gardening tasks are less. We don't have to water as often. So if you're still watering your garden on a set schedule, go out to the garden, check your soil moisture, and you might want to reevaluate your watering schedule, because cooler temperatures mean there's going to be less evaporation. So the soil should stay moist longer. And you might have been watering every day or every 2 days. Well, now you can get by with watering every 3 or 4 days. And when the frost does come and some of your plants die, realize that many of our plants that are growing, the perennials and the trees, they're still alive. Their leaves might have turned brown and fallen off or fallen to the ground, but the plant is still alive. So that's why I also say reevaluate your watering, because a lot of people, a lot of gardeners, when that cold weather comes and it looks like the garden has died, they stop watering. You really don't want to do that with your perennial beds and with your fruit trees in a garden setting. So just yesterday, I was out watering all of those plants. The leaves are brown. There's still a little bit of green, and that's a good indication that the plant is still alive. But fruit trees will send out a lot of new roots, and the roots that are in place will have big growth during the fall, because the ground is still warm and they're setting themselves up going into winter and to be prepared for spring. So there's going to be a lot of root growth in fall. You need to keep watering your fruit trees. The same holds true with a lot of the perennial plants as well. The top of the plant may have died back from the cold, but if you peel back some of those outer layers, you'll see there's still new green growth in the center of those perennial plants. So keep watering to keep those plants alive. I can't tell you the number of gardeners that used to come to the Master Gardener Help Desk in the spring wanting to know why their plants died over the winter. And a lot of it can be traced back to the fall when they stopped watering. The ground was warm, the air was warm, the plants wanted to keep growing, but there just wasn't water in the soil to make that happen. So keep watering your plants. Very important considerations. Yannette's asking, do you recommend covered rebar for row covers? Sure. I recommend using whatever you have at hand that works for you. One of the problems with rebar might be bending it into position, but I use cattle panels, not as thick as rebar, but they still take a lot of time and effort and energy to bend. But that's what I use to support my row covers. If you've got rebar that fits your beds, by all means, go ahead and use it. I don't think there's a problem with that at all. Use whatever you've got. Use PVC, use the cattle panels, use rebar, use bent twigs. Whatever works for you, I say go for it. Covering your plants as needed, like with row covers, or moving into the fall where you might want to use plastic to get a little bit more of protection when the temperature drops. Anything that can hold that up and protect your plants is great. Okay. Yeah, and Heidi's saying, I would consider if a material gives off cold. I think the question might be about the actual material of the metal. So I'll let that continue. So, yeah, Heidi's saying metal can give off cold, especially if it's thick metal. Yes, it can. It's one of those things that it's all relative. It often will get cold and hold a colder temperature than the air, but as long as it's holding material, the air over the plant is still going to be warmer than if there was no protection whatsoever. Rudimental Gardening says, love fall gardening. Cooler temps, fewer pests, less watering, and most plants can be direct sowed. Yes, in fact, I did a video recently about direct sowing fall plants. I think it's a great time of year to do that. Just talked about the watering, pests, of course. There are fewer pests in the fall. And so you can be growing your fall garden. You can be growing into your winter with that protection, and you're going to have much fewer issues with the pests eating your plants, which means you don't have to deal with a lot of that activity that is normal in our gardening day. And a lot of the beneficial insects are still around. They're getting ready to overwinter or migrate depending on the beneficial insect. But if by providing some protection, you're also benefiting some of those insects as well. Okay, Yanette is saying, thanks. I didn't want to uncover rebar to leach into the soil. I actually use rebar to hold my PVC in place, and I'm not at all worried about it leaching into the soil. The iron that it leaches, or the iron oxide, the rust that might get into the soil, is not going to be hazardous to the plants. So I tried to look into some research about that a while back. I did see one university paper that talked about rust in the soil as far as plants were concerned, and there was no damage. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Sandro Splendor says, Gardener Scott, I heard that a significant amount of biomass is in the purchased compost and that it may originate from sanitation plants. Doesn't sound like a great ingredient to my compost. Thoughts? You would be surprised how much is out there. So it's got different names. Biocompost is one of the most common. So go to your store, and if you're buying a bag from some pretty big name brands, and you see one of the ingredients as biocompost, it might be human waste. There are some big plants now that are processing human waste to be used as compost, and they're selling that compost to big companies that are then mixing it into their bags. It really isn't that much to be concerned about. There have been some concerns raised about potential heavy metal contamination, but some of the stuff I've read recently says that isn't as much of a concern as it should be. It's kind of like what we started talking about at the beginning of the show today with using manures and aging them or composting them. And that's what they're doing with human waste. They're aging and composting to the point that there are no pathogens. And even after it's done, they're then often using some method, be it heat or radiation, to deal with anything that might have come through. So my thoughts about it is you're probably already using it in your garden if you've bought a bagged compost or potting soil blend in recent years, because it's out there. If it is a concern for you, just look for that. Anything that says biocompost or something similar might be human waste that is composted. I know Oregon and Washington are starting to do a lot of it, and it's going to be spreading around the world. There are many cultures in the world that have been doing this for hundreds of years, so I don't really have a big issue with it as long as it's been processed well. Carla, there you are. Good to see you back every week from Ely, taking you on my route today. Thank you for starting my week on an optimistic note. It's so wonderful to start your week optimistically, but you start my week optimistically as well. So I hope the weather's holding true are holding good for you in Nevada right now. I haven't really seen what's happening, but I think you're probably enjoying the same high pressure ridge that we are that's giving us such warm weather for the next week. Nayeli is saying, I want to build healthy soil out of dense clay soil that has nothing but weeds and grass that has been here for 5 years. I want to use the no-dig method. What's your thoughts? And so the classic no-dig bed preparation is ideally suited for clay soil. And what that does, or what that method is, you take cardboard and you put the cardboard on top of all those plants, all those weeds, everything that's in place. You don't need to remove those plants at all. You don't need to till up your soil. You just put a layer or two, depending on how thick the plants are, on top of that. And then you just start piling organic material on top of the cardboard. And it's essentially lasagna gardening. I've got a video that you can check out about lasagna gardening where I show the basic concept, but you just add layers of organic material. So you put some shredded leaves, and you put some cut grass, and you put some compost, and you put some straw, and you put the garden material that you might have pulled out. You use kitchen scraps, use more compost. I encourage that you use some of your native soil as well. Don't make it 100% organic. Your soil will have some bacteria that is needed for decomposition. It also has mineral components, but that's the basic idea to grow in a clay soil. Cover up the plants, cover with organic matter, and wait for it to decompose. Fall is a great time to do that, and that's what I've been doing with a lot of my beds. I've been adding organic matter. It's going to start decomposing in the fall. In my cold winter, all of those organisms will go dormant, but then they'll pop right back up again in the spring as soon as it all starts to warm up. And when it comes time to plant in spring, that material should be fully or mostly decomposed. And then you just add some more compost on top, and that area is ready to grow. And then the earthworms and other soil organisms will eventually find that space. And as they find the space, they'll take a lot of this organic material and bring it back down into your clay soil. So after a couple years, the soil underneath a bed system like that is also extremely rich for inches down. So you've got terrible clay soil now. Go through a method like this where you're building the soil above the surface level. And in a few years, I bet when you dig down into what used to be old, terrible clay, you'll have some greatly improved soil, and you can have a lot of beds as long as you've got enough organic material to spread it around. It's a great way to grow in an area with lots of concerns about clay. Okay. Taco Promotion says, good morning, sir. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for your knowledge. Well, thank you. And good morning back to you. I am planning on having a wonderful day. Now that I'm mostly healed, I have been spreading on all the sunscreen and going outside and getting back into my garden. And it is a wonderful way to spend the day. And I will be doing that, especially for the rest of this week, because the weather's going to be so good. And I hope the rest of you are getting out there, either preparing your beds for the winter, preparing your beds for the spring, but definitely getting out there in the waning days of fall. Wayne is saying, can you use a garden bed after it was sitting unused for many years? Sure, absolutely. Do a little bit of investigative work, dig in the bed. The organisms that keep soil alive need moisture. So if the bed has been in the area where it doesn't get any rainfall of any measure and you're not watering it, a lot of those soil organisms might be dormant or dead. So you might need to revive the bed by putting in some new compost and start watering it to bring that soil back to life. But by all means, you could use beds that haven't been used in a while. Just, again, add more organic material, re-energize, invigorate the soil, get it growing, and you can definitely be growing in it for years to come. Just think of the bed as having taken a vacation, and it needs to get back in that mode of doing some work growing plants. Dwayne is saying, what does cat manure do to gardens? Not a lot of good. And so back to the discussion of E. coli, using cat or dog manure in your garden is not recommended. It's more likely to have pathogens in it because they eat meat. The plant eaters manure is fresher or better for the garden because it's a plant-based diet. But when you throw in the animal meat-based diet, not a good thing for the garden. So I'm not really aware of anyone who recommends using cat or dog manure in any way, and I certainly don't. That's the kind of thing it's better just to toss in the trash. Prepper Chris is asking, the trunk of my pecan tree died off. Will it regrow? And I was thinking about this word actually. So pecan, I'm sorry, I say it so many different ways, but here in the States, we say it all those different ways. So I say pecan. I hope that's close to what you're expecting, Chris. But it's hard to tell. So when a trunk dies, the key piece is whether the exterior part of the trunk, so the few layers just below the bark, that's the xylem and the phloem layers within the tree. And that's when all the moisture and the nutrients are going up to the tree, and all those really nice carbohydrates from photosynthesis are coming back down into the roots. As long as that area of the trunk has not been damaged, then yes, it's possible for the tree to send out new branches and new leaves and continue growing. But if the trunk has been damaged in that outer layer where the bark is, it might not come back. And you may have heard the term or something similar about circling. And so there's a lot of rodents, and there are many other pests, some borers. We have that problem here in our forests in Colorado with the pine beetle and the spruce beetles, that they will bore into the wood and then they'll eat their way out. And what causes trees like that to die, either from rodents or from insect pests, is that they'll actually eat those outer layers, and they'll impact the ability of the tree to send the nutrition up and back in that outer layer. And what happens, particularly with animals that are eating the bark of a tree, is they'll encircle the tree and they'll eat all of the bark and the layers underneath the bark on the outside of the tree, and that's enough to kill a tree. So can't tell you for sure if your pecan tree is going to survive, but check on it, check on those outer layers. And if they're still fresh, if they still look like they haven't been impacted, the tree might come back. Good luck with that. Okay. Oh, it broke off at the ground line. Okay. No, it's probably not coming back. That's one of those kind of trees that it grows from the top and will send out more growth from the top and the tips of the branches, but it's not going to be growing from the trunk anymore. So I'm sorry to hear that. When a tree falls over or breaks at the ground line, just like I was saying, it's completely damaged those outer layers of trunk. It might send up some suckers and some water sprouts because there's still energy in the roots, and the tree's going to try to come back. And after a period of years, you might have something, but I would just write it off. That's too bad to hear. Sorry. Denver 1865 says, any thoughts on storing tools in pots during winter? I've been sharpening tools. Some are stored in sand, soaked in oil. Ceramic pots tend to crack here in winter unless out of the elements. That's actually one of the things I was going to talk about today, is your tools and pots going into the winter. So I put all of my tools away. I have stored in oil. And so the idea is you take a bucket, you fill it with sand, and you put oil in it. It used to be recommended that you use like a motor oil. A lot of the recommendations I see now, and what I have done most recently, is to use a vegetable oil, something that is food safe, and you clean off. So your trowels, your pruners, your weeders, whatever you're using, give them a really good cleaning. If they've got an edge on them, especially like a spade or a shovel, I'll get the file out and I'll sharpen up that edge a little bit. And then you oil them, and the oil helps keep the tool from rusting. I'll stick the trowels, I'll stick tools like that in the sand, and that's where they spend the winter, is in a nice protected environment. The bigger tools, I'll just clean up, I'll sharpen, and then I'll rub them with a layer of oil going into the winter as well. Some of the other tools like my secateurs or my pruners, I'll bring them inside, because even though I've got a really dry environment, I don't want them exposed to any humidity that might build up over the winter. So I'll bring them inside just because they tend to have a little more delicate, with springs and things like that. But everything else, yes, clean, oil, put away. And then as far as ceramic pots, it depends on the pot. So some of my bigger open ceramic pots, I'll stop watering when the ground starts freezing. And that allows the soil to dry out enough that typically they won't crack. Because what happens is the soil freezes and then that soil expands, and that's what causes cracking of the pots. But some of my smaller ceramic pots, like I have a strawberry planter that is terracotta, I'll bring it indoors, or actually into the garage or the shed, where it's not exposed to the extreme cold freezing temperatures, where the soil stays a little bit warmer, and I've had some success with that, where the pots don't crack. I've actually started going more and more to some of the composite materials for pots because they don't crack in the winter. But for ceramics, for porcelain, yeah, bring those kind of things indoors if you treasure the pot, just to help reduce the risk of cracking in the cold temperatures like we have here in Colorado. So absolutely, you're doing the right thing. Protect your tools, bring some of those pots in. That's a great way to prepare for the upcoming winter. Teddy Bear DIY says, Gardener Scott, I need a way to kill a tree that I've cut down, but despite soaking it in diesel or oil and such, it keeps producing side shoots all along the trunk that's left. Yeah, and that gets back to what we were just talking about, the pecan tree. So when you have a big established tree, it's got a big root system, and there's a lot of energy in that root system, and that tree wants to survive. And so if you're treating the trunk with an oil or other material, and I don't recommend that because you'll be contaminating the soil for years to come, but you're effectively killing the trunk, but you're not killing the roots. And so the roots still have energy in them to send up some of those shoots, and that's what you're dealing with. One way to deal with that is just to cut those shoots as soon as they have developed, and eventually the roots will run out of energy and they'll die. It may take a while. I'm not a big fan. You can put some systemic herbicides into a trunk like that. It will be absorbed, it'll go into the roots, and it might kill the roots. Again, possible soil contamination. A lot of those systemics can remain in the soil for a long amount of time. But even then, the roots still have enough energy that they're going to try to send out those shoots to keep on growing. So just keep cutting those, and eventually you'll beat the roots. You'll have won the battle, and the whole plant will be dead. It just takes time. I've had to do this in the past with some aspen trees. Same idea. The main tree is cut down, and there are still sprouts coming up 2 years later because there's enough energy in the roots. But after that, the tree is dead. It just takes a little bit of time. Chris says, do you know you're awesome? Thanks. I appreciate that. Okay, let's see. D Back Film says, is putting garlic in the fridge necessary for bulb growth? Yes and no. So garlic in most regions, basically from zone 8 and below, so I'm in zone 5B, I grow garlic. Anyone growing garlic from zone 5 to 8, the natural winter cool down, the cold temperatures are enough for the garlic bulbs to be winterized, and for those cloves, when you plant them, to grow and become full-size plants with a really good-sized bulb to harvest. But when you start getting above zone 8, now you run into the risk where your winters are not going to be cold enough to really get that good development. So if you're in one of those warm regions, then yes, putting a garlic bulb into the refrigerator for at least a month, I often say at least 6 weeks, before you plant those cloves outside, can make all the difference in the world, because your winter in warm regions is not going to be cold enough to get the bulb growing the way it needs to grow. It needs that cold time. So zone 9 and above, sure, go ahead, stick your garlic in the refrigerator before you put it in the ground. You will probably see better results. Jean-Pierre saying, I have to move to another place and I want to start with the lasagna garden. It's going to be the end of November, beginning of December. Is that a time enough to decompose the weeds for spring? Possibly. Again, it depends on your climate, depends on your weather. It's worth a start at least. It's probably not going to hurt anything. Worst case scenario, it hasn't fully decomposed in spring, and so you just add some more compost on top of it, some native soil, and you can grow in that. But if you've got a relatively mild winter, if you've got regular rainfall, then you can expect it to decompose pretty quickly. The issue I have in my area is extremely dry. We don't have a lot of precipitation, so my organic matter takes longer to decompose unless I'm watering it. And typically I'm not watering my lasagna garden beds in winter, so it does take longer to decompose and break down. But it depends on your own climate, your own weather, and whether you're getting that supplemental water. If you have warm days in winter and in early spring, you can hasten that decomposition by going out and watering those lasagna garden beds, and that can help the process. So when it comes time to plant, they're more likely to be decomposed or mostly decomposed. And that's saying, what is the reasons allium plants can't be near certain plants? So allium plants, we're basically talking onions and garlic and flowers like allium. There's actually different philosophies about this, because there are many gardeners who say you should be putting allium plants around other plants. They can deter some pests, but one of the problem is they also can attract some pests, some harmful nematodes, some other insects that will bore into the roots and the bulbs. And so that's one of the reasons why people don't put alliums around food crops, is because they might attract some of those soil-borne pests. But they also do a great job of deterring some of the airborne pests. So it's really a difference in philosophy and what you're growing to determine whether it's a thing to do or not to do. I put garlic, which is in the allium family, and I do onions that are in the allium family, in with all my other vegetable plants, and haven't had any issues whatsoever. But part of that is because I don't have a lot of those soil pests that I know others might have. Chris is saying, I told zinc nails kill trees, true or false? I've heard that too. I do remember reading some research that zinc will affect a tree, and it acts kind of like a systemic herbicide. Depending on the size of the tree, it might not be enough to kill the whole tree. And so it's one of those things I wouldn't recommend burying the nails because of potential leaching. But sure, you can hammer some nails into a tree, give it a try. I haven't had a lot of experience in that. Laura's saying, Gardener Scott, I just bought some biochar. Good for you. Should I wait till spring to add it, or should I charge it now and save it in a bucket till spring? I have 1 empty bed and 2 with cover crops coming up. I would say if you're planning on doing any amending with those beds, with the cover crops, or like you said, the empty bed, if you're planning on amending that empty bed anytime soon, go ahead and add biochar to it as part of that amending. You don't even need to energize the biochar. I'll put dry biochar into my beds as part of the amending in fall, because over the course of the next 6 months or more, the biochar will be energized, charged up by that soil bacteria and those soil nutrients naturally. If you're not going to be amending that bed and you're not going to be turning over those cover crops anytime soon, then sure, go ahead and save the biochar till the spring. But in the spring, you will need to energize it. You will need to use some type of solution to get bacteria and nutrients into it. I've got a video that talks about doing that with biochar, and that's the best way to do it. You don't need to energize the biochar over the winter. It can stay dry. Just get it all souped up, ready to go in the spring when you're ready for your spring amending. Add it with some compost, work it into your soil, and it'll be wonderful, wonderful good stuff. Okay. Lena's saying, I asked Santa for a portable lean-to style greenhouse. We're not in our forever home. I hope Santa brings you that portable lean-to greenhouse. That's a great idea. One of the things about lean-to greenhouses, and I'll be talking about this in a video that's coming up soon where I'll be making a cold frame. The angle of the sun is really important when it comes to greenhouses and when you start growing. And those lean-tos have almost optimum angles. For many of us in both the northern and the southern hemisphere, at the solstice time of year when the seasons are changing, the angle of the sun in the sky is about 45 degrees. And so you get a lean-to greenhouse and that angle is pretty close to 42 degrees. You're getting maximum sun into that space. So I think lean-to greenhouses are great if you're growing in early spring and late fall, because you're really getting about as much sun as you can possibly get and is really being focused in that area. So good for you. I hope Santa does bring that. Okay, let's see what else. Luz Robles is saying, I circle catalogs all the time and then leave them lying around. I've already ordered some of my catalogs. I think I mentioned this last week, maybe the week before, but now's a good time of year to start ordering your catalogs. And sure, I circle, I actually have fun with that. I've done that in the past. We have a whole bunch of catalogs and you just lay them around, and I'll look through one and circle in the catalog what I want, and then go to another catalog and then leave them lying in a circle on the ground so I can sit down and pick out what I want to order when it's time to actually do the ordering. But now is a good time of year to start ordering your catalogs. They'll often be delivered in December and January, so you can be ready to order. When you order a catalog, you'll often, if you order online, you'll often be given the opportunity to sign up for an electronic newsletter. You can always unsubscribe, but I also encourage that you sign up for electronic newsletters as well, because I've been getting a lot of messages in recent days from some of these companies. Their new catalog is not coming out yet, but they're at the end of their season, some of these nurseries, and there's some great prices, some great bargains to be had from some of these nurseries that sell online now that it's the end of the season. And you wouldn't know about those deals if you hadn't signed up for the catalog and then signed up for an electronic newsletter. So just something to think about as we move into winter. Start thinking about what you're going to be growing next year. And one way to do that is by ordering those catalogs. For plants that you know you're going to grow, but I love the catalogs to find out about the plants that I didn't even know I needed to grow yet. And it's a lot of fun, especially when it's cold and snowy outside, to go through all that. Linda's saying, we are chatting about Santa lists and getting specifically what we want from partners who don't garden. Outstanding idea. I've got a video planned. I think it's coming out in 3 weeks, if I remember right. And it's a video about some of my favorite tools and suggested ideas for gifts for gardeners. I did a video like this a year ago. If you haven't seen it, you can check back on it. Share it with your non-gardener who might be buying you some gardening gifts. And then I've got a new video coming out in, like I said, a few weeks where I'll be adding some more gardening gift ideas so the non-gardener knows what to buy the gardener in the family. So that's great because most of the non-gardeners have no clue. So you have to be very specific about what it is you want and what you need. Okay, let's see. Lena's saying to Teddy Bear, we are doing some cosmetic upgrades in the kitchen, and I'm refinishing some wooden furniture. Gardener Scott living in 5/8 time zone, a lean-to will extend the season a lot. Absolutely. You'll probably get at least 3 weeks on the front side and 3 weeks on the back side. You'll probably be extending the garden at least 6 weeks by having a lean-to greenhouse. Luz Robles, thank you for asking. What's on my Christmas wish this year? I honestly haven't thought a lot about that. I'm in the mode of thinking about what I'm getting everybody else for Christmas this year. But I haven't really thought much about my own wish list. So I can't tell you right now what's on my list because I haven't put one together. I don't need much, and my family knows that. My daughter is amazing. Every year, she gets me exactly what I need, which is a new pair of gloves. And so we're a simple family, and we share simple gifts. And it's those kind of things that we all know mean the most. It's those emotional kind of things, those things that mean something. And my daughter makes a point every year to get me a new pair of good leather gloves. In fact, I'm actually using one of the pairs she got me last year now as I'm preparing my garden for the winter. So I'll be asking for a pair of leather gloves, but that's kind of an unasked ask because I know she'll get them for me anyway. And since she's going to be going through this live stream to put all the questions down for me, she'll hear me say that, and she knows I love the leather gloves every year. I will probably get a new hat this next year as well. The hat I have is good. It's starting to get some wear and tear on it, and I'm always protecting my face moving into the future, so I want to make sure I have a really good hat again next year. So I may get myself a hat or ask for a hat this Christmas. Good question, Luz. Thanks for asking that. Mrs. Marvel saying, any plans to design a gardening planner in the future? I know I'm terrible because I keep asking, but there's a mighty need. I am planning on doing some videos talking about garden planning. And I use pencil and paper. So yeah, I think that may fit the need a little bit. I'm not planning on developing a Gardener Scott gardener planner, if that's what you're asking. But I will continue to show how I do it, and I'll be making videos about it. And hopefully that will help when you see the process and help give you some ideas. If you haven't seen the video where I talk about a garden journal, I talk a lot in that about what you should do in your journal, and that deals with the planning for the future. So most garden journals have the information you need. But thanks, that's an interesting idea. I'll be sure I do some videos where I talk more about a garden planner and how you can fit it into your planning. Linda Hardwick says, I would love a Gardener Scott stocking cap. It's cold. Do you make them? That is not an option yet. Now I do have on my merchandise, and so if you look below this video, you'll see links to some of the Gardener Scott merchandise. I don't have everything there, but when you click on that, it should take you to the Teespring store. When you get to the Gardener Scott Teespring store, there's lots of other merchandise. And one of the things I have is a neck gaiter that fully encloses your neck, your chin, your nose. So it's the bottom half of your face, not a stocking cap. But I have been looking for that. And as soon as they have an option for a stocking cap, yes, I'll definitely add that to the list. But as of right now, that's not something that's available to do the merchandise. But it's a great idea. I appreciate that. Thanks. Okay, Heidi Clark, thank you so much for that. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. Yeah, that is one of those things that I don't think often enough about, but I can actually add this to the screen now. And I appreciate the thumbs ups. It really is important, just so I know that it's appreciated. I know you appreciate it, but we all need that little bit of a stroke, and a thumbs up is a nice stroke. And if you haven't subscribed, by all means subscribe. And if you click on the bell for notification, you'll be notified when things like this live stream comes up, and you'll be notified when the new videos come out. And there's a lot of changes that are starting to happen. I'm modifying when I release my videos now. So I'm going to start releasing the videos in the mornings, I think. I have been doing them in late afternoon, but I'm recognizing a lot of you are in other places of the world where you might be asleep when my videos are coming out. So I'm going to start doing them for me in the morning so that they're accessible to everybody in the first day. So by subscribing and clicking on the bell, you'll be able to be notified when the videos are coming out as I start changing some of the times that I'm doing it. Raymond, good to see you here this week. How important is it to wear gloves while working with soil? My friend's mom got infected with worms in her lungs, which the doctor said came from her working with soil barehanded. A lot of it depends on where you are. And I know you're in a very warm environment with a lot of those type of pests. And if I'm working with soil, if I'm amending my beds, if I'm pulling out plants, I'm wearing gloves, mostly for the protection, but protection from the stickers and anything that might actually, damage the skin, but also partly just to make sure that I'm protecting my hands from the soil. Now, that being said, if you have a nice, deep, rich soil, few things are as wonderful as putting your hands in the soil. So when I'm putting the seeds in, when I'm actually next to the plants, face to face with the plants, I'm not wearing gloves. I'm working with the soil. But those are some things that you probably should be concerned about. Peat moss, for instance. There are some potential diseases that are spread by the dust within the peat moss. So if I'm working with dry peat moss to make my soil mixes, I'll wear some type of face covering just so I'm not breathing in the dust. Those are the kind of things to start thinking about as you garden, because you never know what's happening. If you know that someone in your area had some type of problem with the soil, and it was either an insect or bacteria or a fungal problem, then I would definitely say start gardening with gloves at every opportunity. A lot of that is education. Find out what's in your area, what your climate and soil might have potential problems with, and then you can deal with that. Linda Hardwick, thank you so much for that super chat. And I do like enjoying my passion. It really is a passion. I was thinking about this. I talked last week about sharing the garden with your family and getting others enthusiastic about it. And my daughter and I have talked a few times since then about that subject and others. And I was asking her about the kids. And it really is a passion. And I think having a passion in life is important, regardless of what it is. Now, you can go out and grow some plants and come in, and your passion might be painting, or your passion might be motorcycles. Your passion might be anything. You can still garden and still enjoy the gardening, but having a passion in life really does make life more enjoyable and really does give a reason to wake up every morning. I think I'm extremely lucky because gardening is my passion, and even more so, instructing and teaching and sharing about gardening might even be a bigger passion. So I love getting out in my garden. I love building the garden. I love doing all those things like I mentioned earlier. But I really do love sharing my passion with you, because I really hope that spark catches on. And I really hope it's one of those things you can carry into the future, especially with the youth in your life and the other people around you. I'm not going to be around forever, and especially a lot of you young new gardeners, I hope the day comes that you can be doing like I'm doing. You're sharing your passion for gardening that you've developed over a lifetime. And maybe then, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, when you're doing that, you'll say, you know, there was this old guy I used to listen to, and he's the one that really helped gardening become a passion for me. And if you do that and you share your passion with someone else, they'll do the same thing as they grow and learn and become passionate about gardening. So that's a huge reason why I do this. I just love it. I really do. I really do love spending the time on Monday. I love making the videos. I love sharing it. And it really is a passion. And it makes me happy. And it keeps me going. It really does give purpose to all of our lives if you approach it from that perspective. Okay, let's see. Juggernaut Abuser says, I will never forget you, Scott. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. That's one of those things that we all have impacts on all each other's lives. And so I appreciate you saying that, because I so am thinking and remembering so many of you. And I noticed you have a question up above. You say, I started my garden 8 days ago and I planted my first plant, which is radish seeds. Great first plant. Only the past 2 days, am I seeing any signs of growth? Is that okay? Oh, yeah. Radishes actually will germinate faster than enough plants. But if you started it 8 days ago and you saw growth 2 days ago, then it took about 6 days for them to germinate, which is perfectly in line with radishes. That's perfectly normal. That's great. Getting back to that idea of a garden journal, this is a perfect example. If you're new to gardening, if you're starting a new garden, if you're starting a new seed, keep track of it. And so if you put a seed in the ground and you note it takes 6 days to germinate and then starts growing fine, well, put that in your garden journal so that next year, next season, if you put seeds in the ground, you expect them to germinate in 6 days, and after 12 days they haven't germinated, now you know something is wrong because you've established a baseline in the past. And it could be that the seeds are old. It could be the soil's too wet. It could be birds ate them. It could be lots of things. But when you establish a baseline, like your radishes take 6 days to germinate, now you'll be able to do investigative work in the future. If you grow those same radish seeds and they don't germinate in 6 days, you can start learning about what changed and why they didn't germinate in 6 days. Maybe they'll germinate in 4 days next year. Maybe they'll germinate in 8 days next year. But this is all part of the wonderful world of gardening, and becoming more expert as you garden is by observing those kind of things. So I wouldn't worry about it at all. Sounds like your radishes are doing just fine. Any tips on making them sprout faster? Soil temperature is key. So as far as germination, there's just a few things that the seeds need. They need moisture, they need to be a viable seed, and they need some warmth. And different seeds require different warmth. And so for most seeds, if the soil is warmer, they'll germinate faster. So if there's a way to warm the soil, so if you're growing outside, for instance, radish seeds, that takes 6 days to germinate. Well, if you put some hoops over that bed and you cover that bed with plastic, and now you can warm the soil underneath, that might be a way to get those seeds to germinate in 4 or 5 days, because the soil will be warmer and they'll germinate faster. There is an upper limit. A lot of those cool season plants that grow in cool weather like radishes, if the soil gets too hot, it'll actually delay germination. So soil temperature is a key component. And that's why I say do the investigative work, because if it doesn't turn out the same, because you may find out that if you try to grow radishes in the middle of summer, they might not germinate as fast or at all if the soil is too hot compared to those same seeds that can grow great in cool conditions. Okay, Bettina said, what happened to the plant you were going to track and named after your grandson? Will you be doing an update on that, or did you do it already and I missed it? So I am going to mention that in a video coming up in a couple weeks where I do a review of my garden. I'm going to review my garden, tell you all about the lessons I learned, and that's going to be one of them. So that was part of the seed challenge that was put out by the Black Gumbo channel. And the idea was to track a seed. So I had a couple videos about it. I talked about it when I first started the seed challenge. I did a video when I was talking about growing the tomato plants. And then I did another video where I mentioned it when I was talking about trellising the tomato plants. And then a hard freeze came way early, over almost 6 weeks earlier than normal. I had a hard freeze. I did a video about that, and it killed that tomato plant. So there really is nothing to update because it never even got to the point where I was able to grow tomatoes. I had a really rough beginning of the season with some hail, and it really shredded a lot of the tomatoes. But that plant actually survived, was starting to grow, was starting to flower, and then the freeze came. So there's the update. Nothing came from it, and I will mention that in that video to come, where my season this year was extremely short because of the weather, because of severe weather on the front side and early severe weather on the back side. Still had some great success with a lot of my plants, but that one in particular didn't grow like I had hoped. So thank you for asking about that. That was a black crim tomato plant. And even on the Black Gumbo channel, he did a review of the tomato that he was tracking, and he had the same problem. I think his was pest and disease, but the plant that he was tracking didn't make it to harvest either. Just goes to show, and this is one reason why I love talking to you all and I love sharing this information, is because you can learn so much, especially when things don't go right. And so I was tracking that plant because I love the black crim tomato with the intention of showing you what a great plant it was and how delicious the fruit was. And then nothing happened because the weather was so bad. Well, I've learned from that, and I'm going to be growing my tomatoes a little differently next year, putting them under some protection early in the season, which I haven't done a lot of in the past, so that if that hail comes, it's not going to devastate the garden. And I'll also grow the tomatoes a little bit differently. I was using that one trellis. I'm going to grow them in a different area so that I can protect them better from early freezes, which often come. So even when things don't go right, you can still learn from it and figure out how you need to do things a little different in the future. Okay, we've got some things. Jay is pointing out to Jose, if you want to get my attention, put Gardener Scott. Actually type out Gardener Scott in your comment, or put the @ symbol Gardener Scott. And I'll see it. I'll be much more likely to see it. So like Jay points out in the answer or the comment she put to Jose, I can see the Gardener Scott and the @ Gardener Scott in her comment. It pops right up. I see Bettina above that said, oh no, that's too bad, Gardener Scott. I see Juggernaut Abuser saying, I hear a lot of people say that indeterminate tomatoes are great, and I agree. Are there any pros of determinate tomatoes though? Gardener Scott. So when I see that, it's so much easier for me to see that you're asking a question that I can answer. And so to answer that question about determinate tomatoes, yes, there's a primary reason to grow determinates. So the big difference between indeterminate tomatoes and determinate tomatoes is how they grow and when they ripen. So an indeterminate tomato will keep growing and growing and growing, and all along the main stem, at each of those little crooks, a flower will develop or a flower cluster will develop, and the tomatoes will grow. And then as that vine gets longer, another cluster will grow a little farther up the vine. Determinate tomatoes are different. They'll grow to a predetermined genetic size, and then they put most of their flowers out at the same time. And then those flowers will fruit at pretty much the same time. So when it comes to harvest, you'll get pretty much an entire year's harvest within about a 2-week period for those determinate tomatoes. Many of the determinate tomatoes we grow are paste tomatoes, the kind of tomatoes that we're going to use to make a tomato sauce. So there's your pro. You grow determinate tomatoes and you get a huge harvest all at once within a brief period of time. Now you've got a whole bunch of tomatoes and you can make your tomato sauce. You can make your tomato paste. You can do your dried tomatoes. You can do whatever it is you're using a lot of tomatoes for, all at the same time. That's the big pro for determinate tomatoes. Also, they do tend to grow a little bit shorter and smaller than the big vine of an indeterminate tomato. So if you have smaller space, you might want to grow a determinate tomato. But the primary reason is just so you have a big harvest and you can use that harvest all at once. And then when the harvest is done, the plant is essentially done. It's not going to keep flowering and keep fruiting like an indeterminate tomato will. So if you like succession planting, another reason to grow determinates. You grow determinate tomatoes, they fruit, you harvest, the plants are done, you pull out the plants and you're all ready to grow a whole new crop of something different for the second half of the season. So some good reasons to grow both, but there you have some of the differences. Kamal saying, Gardener Scott, what is the benefit of cutting off suckers on indeterminate tomatoes? I didn't prune this year and the suckers developed tomatoes too. I have a couple videos about this. I encourage you take a look on my channel for my how to prune tomatoes video because I talk a lot more about it. But the main benefit is to keep your plant under control. If you don't prune an indeterminate tomato plant, then at those crooks between the stem and the leaves, you'll have a sucker develop. And that sucker can grow into a full-size plant. And that plant will have more suckers. So a tomato plant can just become overwhelming and take over a garden bed if you don't prune. So that's one of the primary reasons I do it. The pruning also improves air circulation, which cuts down dramatically on potential tomato diseases. So to cut down on diseases and to keep your plant under control, I recommend pruning as the way to do that. Now, those suckers, like you said, they'll grow flowers on them and they'll fruit. And therefore, you don't need to prune every sucker. I allow some of my suckers to grow because that's more tomatoes. When you prune a sucker off, you are cutting back on the potential harvest, the number of tomatoes. Now, if you're making a stronger plant because the plant is not sending all of its energy to a lot of these side plants that are growing, you're going to get bigger fruit typically, not as many, but bigger. So there's another advantage if you want to look at it. If you want bigger tomatoes, prune off some of those suckers. If you want a whole bunch of suckers or a whole bunch of tomatoes, then allow some of those suckers to continue to grow and you'll get a whole bunch of tomatoes. A lot of it depends on how much space you have, how you're growing, whether you're trellising or not trellising, and that'll make a huge difference in growing. So if you haven't pruned before, you might want to try some of it. Prune off a few of the suckers, prune off some of those lower branches to keep air circulation going, and see how you like it and see how the plant grows. Another one of those things to put into a garden journal, how you have analyzed your own actions in the garden, whether you like it or not, and then do it the way you prefer in the future. You don't have to prune tomatoes. For me, I find it to be beneficial. Okay, Juggernauts Abuser saying, what's the oldest indeterminate tomato you ever had? So when I was growing in the greenhouse, I had a 42-foot dome greenhouse. This was at the school and all part of the Galileo Garden Project. I would start tomatoes early in the season and I could put them into the greenhouse about 6 weeks earlier than if I put them outside. And then I could continue growing them almost 2 months after the season. So my typical season runs from the middle of May until the beginning of October when I'm growing outside. But in the greenhouse, I was able to grow indeterminate tomatoes from the beginning of April to the end of November. And so that's basically 8 months of growing for an indeterminate tomato, which in my region is almost unheard of. And those tomato vines were about 15 feet long. I grew them vertically and attached them to wire cables and had to get on a ladder to do some of the pruning and the harvesting in those later months. So for me, in my region, about an 8-month-old indeterminate tomato is as old as I've gotten, which is actually pretty good, a lot better than outside. Okay, so let's get to that point of the session where we talk a little bit about the philosophy for the week. And again, this I want to tie into the idea of fall gardening and winter gardening, because for a lot of you, if this is your first season growing, you're going to be exposing yourself to a completely new garden environment. It's going to be different because plants are going to be dying. The chores are going to be changing, like I talked about before. You may feel a little overwhelmed. You may feel uncertain. You might be moving forward with uncertainty about how you act. And I want to say you're not alone. These are all gardening activities that all of us do on a yearly basis once we've been doing this for a while. And even if you're an experienced gardener and something didn't go right and you've got to clean up your garden, you're preparing the beds for next year like I am, you're amending the soil, you just get tired and you don't want to do it, you want to put it off till spring, that's okay. You're not alone in thinking that. Now, I'm trying to stay as active as possible to show you how to put a garden to bed for the winter, how to amend your beds, because I want to do the video so I can show you how I do it. But many years in the past, and even in some of my beds right now, I'll get to it later. I don't have to do it right now. So if you feel yourself starting to get a little overwhelmed or unsure, just take a step back, relax. You don't have to do it today. We're all going through the same thoughts. And spend some of the time watching videos, reading blogs, or just doing something else completely different to get your mind into that state where gardening is enjoyable. This time of year in the fall, and for those of you that are in the spring that are getting everything ramped up, these are busy times of year. There's a lot of gardening activity, those garden chores. There's a lot that needs to be done. And a lot of it is hard. A lot of it requires physical labor. And a lot of it just isn't fun. And if you do it when you're not in the right mindset, where it's not fun and just becomes a chore, now when your garden is put to bed and you go back in and you're looking out the window because you don't have those chores anymore, well, the last chore on your mind was, man, this just isn't fun. I'm just not enjoying gardening because all I'm doing is raking up the leaves, or all I'm doing is digging up the soil, or all I'm doing is putting the mulch, or all I'm doing is getting cold. Try not to end your active gardening season that way. Try not to have the last activity you do be a negative one. Instead, as you do all of these activities with the right frame of mind from a more positive aspect, you can look at it and say, okay, yeah, I'm done. I didn't do everything I wanted to do, but these beds are ready for planting in spring. I don't need to worry about it anymore. I'm going to go inside and order some seed catalogs. I'm going to start doing some of that garden planning. I'm going to start thinking about what is yet to come and not focus on what just happened that might not have been so enjoyable. So if you find yourself thinking that at all, realize you're not alone. All of us go through that. Even me, who is so passionate about gardening and so passionate about building my garden, there are those times, usually the physical labor, when the weather isn't cooperating, when it really isn't that fun. And those are the times I try to walk away from it and come back to it when the weather is better and when I've got a better frame of mind. And if the weather doesn't get better, well, then that task just doesn't get done. I've been working on making my new metal beds for a couple months now. I'm way behind on my schedule. A lot of it has been because of the weather. A lot of it has been because of my recuperation, but I'm back into it now. So the weather's cooperating. I'm going to get outside, and I hope to get some of those tasks done. But if I don't, okay, fine. It waits till spring. It gets done when it gets done. That's the way I approach gardening. Do your gardening when you're ready to be a gardener, when you're ready to take a look at the insects and be part of nature and enjoy seeing what you've already accomplished. Be in the garden with a good frame of mind, and it makes the good frame of mind better. If you recognize that you're not in the best frame of mind, well, don't go to the garden to work. Go to the garden to improve your frame of mind so that you're feeling better, so that you can take a more positive approach to your gardening. I think that's a really good way to approach it, especially as this time of year hits us, northern and southern hemisphere, where it's just hard work. Give yourself a break to say, I can relax. I don't have to do it right now, and I can just enjoy the garden as I see fit to enjoy the garden. So I hope that helps. I'll be talking a lot more about those kind of things in the weeks ahead. Arena Kim, thank you so much for that super sticker. I do appreciate the contribution. I appreciate all of you being here. This is one of those things that I look forward to every Monday. I'm planning on doing next Monday and all the Mondays to come as well. And so I look forward to seeing you here next Monday as well, as we repeat this, as we talk more about gardening, that we get to the questions, the philosophies, and all the rest of it. I'm looking forward to a wonderful gardening week because the weather's going to be good and I'm going to be able to get some of those chores done. I hope you have a good gardening week as well and can get done what you can. But all along the way, please just enjoy gardening. That's what it's all about. I'm Gardener Scott. Hope to see you here next Monday. Enjoy your gardening week.